Hello everyone and welcome to Learn LEED. I'm Trey Hauk and today's chapter is nature's most vital resource, water. We need it to live, we need it to clean ourselves, but most importantly, we need it for a clean environment. And so this chapter is going to be going over how we can efficiently use our water. As an overview, we're going to first go over water scarcity, then we're going to talk about the hydrologic cycle, water budget rules of thumb, sustainable stormwater management, and then last but not least, landscaping water efficiency. So, starting off with water scarcity. You might think that because the planet is comprised of almost 70% water, that water shortages shouldn't even be an issue, right? Well, when we take a look at the actual reservoir and the composition of that water, a lot of that is more so in the oceans, and 90 up to 97% in fact. That clean potable drinking water, the water that we can actually use without excessive filtration, only accounts for about 2.75%. And unfortunately, for certain climates and areas that don't have access to a lot of that potable water, we see aquifers overexploited, dried up, and people lacking nature's most vital resource. Pictured here is a graph kind of showcasing this with the shrinking Aral Sea. It used to be the world's fourth largest body of inland water, but now the Aral Sea is more like the Aral Lake, the Aral Creek, even, with how small and dehydrated it has become over time, just from the diversion of its inflowing rivers for agricultural irrigation. And here in the United States, it's no different. We can see that especially in the Midwest, in the Southwest, we have a large problem with water supply. And in these areas, you can kind of see that the darker areas are where stress is higher. That's almost half of the geographical United States. So why is this? Well, if we take a look at water distribution and shortages in the United States, we can see that the rate of water consumption is over 40 times that of gasoline. And agriculture, in large part, is the cause of this supply problem because it's responsible for up to 80% of water consumption, and 60% of that water is wasted because of leaky canals, evaporation, and mismanagement. So, when we talk about this wasted water, how do we circumnavigate this? Well, we circumnavigate it with something we call the hydrologic cycle. Now, there is the natural hydrologic cycle, which if you've taken a fifth grade biology, geography class, you would know there's the evaporation, condensation, transpiration, evaporation, and that whole cycle, right? But in addition to that natural hydrologic cycle, we also talk about the built environment hydrologic cycle, which is how our man-made structures, that's our canals, our drainage ditches, our dams, kind of affect that flow of water and how it impacts it. When we refer to this, we mainly are talking about groundwater. And you can see here on this graph that groundwater is a very valuable resource that is, while having abundance in some areas, is more particularly having scarcity in others. Now, surface water, as you might expect, is going to be a part of this groundwater. It's going to be the water that is right above the surface. Your lakes, your rivers, your creeks, any body of water that you can see from an airplane, chances are it's going to be your surface water. Then we have fossil water, which are these kind of deep below cisterns of water that have been around since long before humans have. We're talking reservoirs of potable water that haven't that are abundant, but once they're gone, they're gone. Stormwater, that's just the water that kind of runs off from, well, storms. It's going to specifically cover that just because when we have stormwater, there's a certain level of runoff that occurs that can carry certain chemicals and minerals that might not be good for the environment. Um, this is different from rainwater, which is more so the actual water itself rather than the process in which it runs off. Rainwater harvesting is one of the more common strategies that we use in water efficiency, so that we're able to take that water from nature and reuse it in the built hydrologic cycle. Now, this depends from state to state. I know in Utah there's laws against this just due to the shortage of water. They want to make sure that the government has the ability to mitigate and distribute that water, but it is allowable in other areas where water is more abundant. Um, and so in places where it's not allowed, and even in places where it is, we have what we like to call xeriscaping, or formerly known as enviroscaping, which is essentially the usage of native fauna and local organisms, plant-based organisms, to facilitate a better drainage and runoff system, rather than just having a full grassy field that doesn't really have a spot for that water to go, and it's going to have shallow roots that aren't properly absorbing the water once it sinks in. So, as far as the actual terminology of the hydrologic cycle, we have three main types of water. There's the potable or clean water, which I've talked about already, which is that water that's safe for human and animal consumption. That's your springs, your wells, your rainwater, purified water, and last but not least, city water. Then you have your gray water, which is used water without toxic chemicals and or excrement. Think of things like your bathroom, your sink, your toilet. Water that has chemicals in it that otherwise isn't necessarily harmful, like soapy water. Then last but not least, we have black water, which is going to more specifically be that water that's contaminated with toxic chemicals and or excrement. So we have wastewater from toilets, garbage disposals, industrial processes. And why this is important is that when we're trying to develop a high-performance hydrologic strategy, we want to first choose a water supply, and then second, find technology that optimizes that water usage. We're looking at dual wastewater systems and wastewater treatments to kind of help convert more of that gray water and black water into a category higher, so potable and gray water respectively for the two. We want to, again, apply that life cycle costing to help analyze the cost of this over time. And we want to make sure that our landscape is optimizing the amount of stormwater infiltration. You can also create a grain roof for this, which we'll go into a little further. But those are some keys for that high-performance building strategy right now. When we're designing it, we're looking at a baseline for water consumption. And how we measure that is gallons per minute / flush. Not only that, but we want to identify the types of people using our water. So is it FTEs, commercial guests, transients, residents? And then from there, we want to estimate how often each appliance gets used daily with a table similar to the one pictured. And we want to identify other water resources if necessary. I'll give you a bit of time to look at this. And moving on. So rules of thumb for saving water. It's going back to that closed system. We want to build off of a net zero theory, which is we only use what nature can provide. We don't want to use any excess or any more than what we are taking. And we do that through not only reducing the amount of water we use, but by increasing its efficiency. There's two common terms that are used when it comes to water reduction. There's a factor 2 and a factor 4, which is essentially you're dividing it by a factor of 2 or a factor of 4 respectively. So you're either using half as much or a quarter as much water. Now, as far as sustainable stormwater management goes, this is one of the kind of byresults of sustainable construction. And with it, we aim to mimic nature by integrating stormwater into building and site development to reduce the damaging effects of urbanization on rivers and streams. In addition, it focuses on the on-site collection and conveyance of stormwater to promote the infiltration of water into the ground. One example of how we do this are downspouts. So you got your gutter, the water runs off the roof, and instead of just falling on the ground wherever, it then goes onto the downspout, which then goes into a place that has been designed with the elevation of the site in mind for the water to safely run off without it pooling or damaging the building. Another example of this are, and another example of that water collection system are rain barrels. We've already talked about this a little bit, but just to kind of give you an idea there. Cisterns, another option if your state allows rainwater collection. And then we also have eco-roofs and roof gardens. Now, these are a very commonly thrown around idea, but you have to remember that when you're designing for this, you have to design for the additional load that all that soil and all that foliage and fauna is going to bring. So for a lot of places, it might not be economically viable. But in the areas where it is an efficient, effective, and frankly beautiful solution. Depending on who you ask, anyways. Some people might not like the green roof idea, but personal taste. In addition to that, we want vegetated swales and vegetated infiltration basins. Basically, these are areas where we have local fauna, where water will naturally pour down to and then filtrate into the ground because of the fauna there. That root system essentially helping them to absorb the water. In addition to that, we also have infiltration planters. We want to make sure that we're designing our planters so that they are also contributing to this water infiltration into the ground. Pervious pavement, try saying that 5 times fast, is another option. As with regular concrete, the water doesn't really have a place to go. It's impervious, and so it will kind of just pool and flood. But with pervious pavement, it allows for a little bit more of that water infiltration. Turf block is another example of this. It's essentially just a type of pervious pavement that allows for water infiltration. And then we also have soakage trenches. This kind of ties a little bit more into the vegetated swales and the drainage ditches, but this time now we're putting it under the ground. So after the water kind of comes in from another man-made area, it pulls down here and pulls into the actual area designed specifically to infiltrate as much water as possible. Now, around 30% of residential water is used just for exterior uses. That's keeping your lawns green, your trees healthy. And that's about 32 gallons per person per day. And another 29 gallons per person per day is used for maintaining landscaping. Now, obviously, this amount varies depending on the climate and local jurisdictions which have restrictions on, which counties can use water when. But that's still a lot of water per individual. And one of the largest contributors to this are golf courses. We have about 16,000 golf courses in the United States, and they consume about 2.7 billion gallons of water per day. And that's for short, flat grass that, while pervious, isn't infiltrating as well as the natural landscape would be. So we've already talked a little bit about xeriscaping, but what it specifically is the use of drought-tolerant native and adapted species of plants in turf grass. If you've ever seen a building that has not a conventional green landscape, but more like these wildflowers and it looks like a little overgrown, that is actually successful xeriscaping. Now, these principles can be used to ensure a water-efficient landscape. And there's a couple bullet points that we like to shoot off here. Planning and design, soil analysis, appropriate plant selection, turf grass areas, efficient irrigation, the use of mulches, and then last but not least, appropriate maintenance. Kind of all these concepts that we've talked about in one way or another up until this point. Now, with xeriscaping, we don't always have to make it this weird, patchy amalgam of plants. We can try to strive for natural or native landscaping, which allows not only the building to blend much more in with the natural environment, but allows for better stormwater management, and water efficiency, as we're requiring less water to keep these plants healthy and alive. It also promotes a sense of regional identity, intricacy and detail, and elements of change, right? The local fauna is going to change depending on where you are locally. However, a built McDonald's is most likely going to be the same whatever state you're in. So, kind of wrapping things off here, I just want to end things with a question of how does planned landscaping help preserve water? Think on that, and I'll see you on the next chapter of Learn LEED.